Dad, get out of that car right now. Bethany's voice exploded in my ear with such a desperate scream that my body froze. He's going to commit you to a nursing home in another state. I saw the papers. He's going to leave you there and keep all the inheritance money. Run, Dad, run. The call dropped before I could respond. My fingers trembled over the phone. The car continued steadily down the highway, and Alex, my eldest son, was at the wheel, too serene, as if nothing was wrong, as if he wasn't taking me away with a fake smile and a hidden plan. 3 days before, he had appeared at my door, saying he wanted to reconnect. Let's take a trip. Dad, just the two of us. Like when I was little, he hugged me, spoke softly, even complimented the coffee I made. He said he had reserved a beautiful place with a lake. Silence, a fireplace for us to talk. And I, fool that I was, believed him. It was everything I wanted. Affection, attention, to be remembered. But now, with Bethany's scream echoing in my head and Alex's silence in the seat beside me, everything was crumbling. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to make me disappear. My name is Arthur. I'm 76 years old. I'm a widower, father of 2 children, and I carry in my hands the marks of a lifetime of work. I was an agricultural technician for more than 4 decades. I lived on a farm in Kansas, then near Kansas City. I was never about luxury, but I was always about truth. And now on that highway, with no shoulder, with the seatbelt pressing against my chest, I understood. Sometimes danger doesn't come from outside. It comes from those who carry your name in their surname. Before continuing this story, I would like to thank the Revenge with Thomas channel for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. And I ask you who are watching to help this channel by subscribing to it and also commenting on what city you're watching us from. Every day there's a new story. It all started 3 days after the anniversary of my Anne's death. I was kind of quiet, silent, looking at some photos of her in the living room when I heard a knock at the door. It was Alex. He never showed up like that without warning. But he came in smiling, hugged me, brought an apple pie, said it was from his favorite bakery. He kept looking at me with forced affection. And in the middle of coffee, he blurted out, "Dad, I want to spend some time with you. I want to reconnect. We've grown apart, and I miss it. I reserved a cabin in the Rocky Mountains. Quiet, away from everything. Just the two of us, no cell phones, nothing, just us." That caught me by surprise. My eldest son, who barely responded to my messages, now wanted to spend a weekend alone with me. I felt important. I felt remembered, and I accepted. On Friday, he picked me up in the morning. We got in the car and set off. He said it was far, but it would be worth it. We took the back roads, crossing small towns, taking routes I had never seen. Throughout the journey, he maintained a lukewarm conversation without many questions, without real affection. You know that silence that carries something? That's it. I insisted on thinking it was just my impression until my phone, which had no signal, suddenly vibrated. It was Bethany, and in that call, everything changed. After her scream on the phone, I was on high alert. I tried to disguise it, hid the phone in my pocket, and asked Alex calmly, "Son, what's the name of the cabin again?" He answered with another question, then changed the subject. My heart started beating faster. My hands were sweating. The road was no longer paved. We passed through a dirt stretch without signs. Without signs of life nearby, I understood I needed to get out of there. Salvation came at a stop. Alex said he was going to fill up at a small old gas station in the middle of nowhere. When he parked and went into the convenience store, I said I was going to the bathroom. I grabbed my backpack, opened the door slowly, and ran inside. I locked the bathroom door and sat down with my clothes on. I didn't know what to do. I stayed there for about 15 minutes. When I heard the car start and drive away, I was paralyzed. He left me, and didn't send a message. Didn't call anything, as if he was expecting me to disappear. I left the bathroom, asked for the store's phone, and called Bethany. She answered right away. Breathless. Dad, thank God. Where are you? I said the name of the gas station. And she said, stay there. I'm sending Peter, my friend, a retired police officer. He'll be there in 50 minutes. Stay inside the store. Don't leave. And that's what I did. I sat there looking at the road through the window, trying to understand how Alex had reached this point. How can someone manage to deceive their own father, lie to their face, devise a plan to commit someone who raised them just to have access to money, because that's what it was? Bethany discovered that he had falsified documents, used a power of attorney that I had signed a while ago, thinking it was just for the bank, and had filed for guardianship in another state. The idea was to get me out of town, forcibly commit me to a nursing home paid for by him, and then take control of my account. The same account where I kept all the inheritance money I received from a distant uncle. Alex knew about this before I did, and instead of telling me, he plotted. He smiled and plotted. Peter arrived on time, a tall man with a firm voice who treated me with respect. Took me straight to Bethany's house, where I am to this day, in silence, just watching, just waiting. Alex didn't call, didn't ask where I was, didn't do anything, and that tells me everything. He knows the plan failed, and maybe he thinks I won't react. But he doesn't know who he's dealing with, because I'm not stupid. I'm not weak. I'm a father, yes, but I'm a man. And just because I have wrinkles on my face doesn't mean I've lost my mind. Just because I walk slower doesn't mean I'm disposable. And whoever tries to erase a father out of greed will learn that inheritance isn't stolen. It's earned. And this son doesn't deserve anything. After Peter dropped me off at Bethany's house, I sat in the living room armchair like someone who still hasn't really woken up from a nightmare. It was as if I had left a place where time runs crooked, where words lie and hugs squeeze to deceive. My head was spinning. My chest hurt. And Bethany there in front of me with tears in her eyes and her jaw clenched with anger, stretched out her arm and put the papers on the table. Dad, look carefully. But you need to know everything. I wasn't ready. But I read there in black and white. There was the name of that clinic in rural Montana, a contract with a date, amount paid, digital signature, a fake letter with my name authorizing indefinite commitment signed by a legal guardian. His name. He had already filed for partial interdiction, alleging lack of lucidity due to age with notarized signature. And he also attached a medical report from a clinic I had never seen in my life, a paper saying that I showed signs of mental confusion, difficulty discerning and compromised basic routine. I read that, and my hand trembled. My own son saying I was crazy? And all this for what? To take away my access to the account where I kept that inheritance money that came from my great-uncle, Elias, who died in upstate Michigan. The truth is that this money appeared suddenly. Old Elias never had children, and his wife died before him. When he passed away, only I remained as a direct living relative. I was the one who visited him when I was a boy, who wrote letters every Christmas. The inheritance was small for the size of the world, but big for me. After taxes and bureaucracy, a good chunk fell. I didn't tell anyone, not even the kids. I saved it, used part of it to fix the roof, bought brand name medicine instead of generic, and left the rest sitting. My plan was to leave it for the grandchildren, for their studies, to get married, for when they needed it. But Alex found out, and that's when the plan began. Bethany told me that everything started to stink when Alex's current boyfriend, a guy named Dylan, started to suspect his coldness when he talked about me. He thought it was strange that he didn't visit me, but suddenly wanted to take me away. He started snooping through conversations, listened to calls on speakerphone, and without him knowing, copied some audios. One of them knocked me down. It was Alex's voice saying, "I'm already taking care of this. He won't even notice. By the time he sees it, he'll already be committed." An old man like that with $120, 000 in his account, and he doesn't do anything with the money. I'm not going to let it rot. At that moment, Bethany paused the audio. I had my hand over my mouth. I almost threw up. My son's voice talking about me as if I were a problem, an obstacle, a wall that needed to be torn down to get through. What hurt me most wasn't even the money. It was the contempt, the coldness, how he referred to me as that old man. I who held him when he was born, who sold my only car to pay for his college, who stopped buying clothes for myself to see him grow up right. It wasn't a stranger. It was my son. And there, sitting in that room, I could only remember his little hands clinging to mine, the way he called me daddy with his soft little voice. Where did that little boy go? What part of life ripped out his soul and left only this ambition? Bethany apologized for not telling me sooner. She said she suspected her brother's behavior, but didn't imagine it would go this far, and asked me to stay with her for a while. I accepted, but not out of fear. I accepted because I needed to think, because now I was the one who was going to make the plans, and no longer as a hurt father, but as a betrayed man who still had a voice, lucidity, and justice on his side. The next morning, I asked Bethany to take me to the bank. I spoke with my trusted manager, the one who has known me for years, Richard. I explained everything, showed the documents, asked for immediate blocking of all external transactions. I made a new registration with dual authentication. I left the old card at the counter and asked for absolute secrecy. Then we went straight to the notary. I revoked all signatures and powers of attorney I had made for Alex. All of them. I updated my will, too. I removed his name. I removed it with a firm hand without pain, because whoever tries to disappear with their father out of greed doesn't deserve to be remembered. On the way back to Bethany's house, we were silent in the car. She respected my grief, because that was really grief. I didn't just lose trust. I lost a son. And as I looked out the window, watching the houses go by, I realized that everything could have ended differently if it hadn't been for that call. If it hadn't been for Bethany's scream. If it hadn't been for her courage to stick her neck out and unmask her own brother. Later in the late afternoon, I received a message from Alex. It was just this: "Did you arrive safely?" I didn't respond. And I don't intend to, because what I have to say to him can't be written in a message. If he wants to know, let him come look me in the eyes. If he has the courage, and I know he'll try to justify it. He'll say it was a misunderstanding, that it was for my own good, that I'm old and don't know what I'm doing anymore. He'll try to paint me as sick, confused, tired. But now it's too late because I may be 76 years old, but I've never been stupid. I've never been weak. And now Now he's going to see who he's dealing with. The days that followed were the quietest of my life. Not that silence of peace. It was a heavy silence of someone who had just watched a part of their heart break inside. I stayed at Bethany's house in a simple but cozy room with a window that faced the backyard, where she had some iron chairs and a pine tree that Anne would have loved. And it was there, between the smell of wet earth and the muffled sound of cars in the distance, that I began to understand what had just happened. Because the realization doesn't hit all at once. It comes in pieces, hurting little by little, and every memory with Alex now tasted like something spoiled. The phone didn't ring. He didn't send messages. No attempt to look for me, to ask where I was, to know if I was okay. And his absence hurt more than if he had cursed me, because it showed that he knew exactly what he had done, knew he had been discovered, and chose silence as a shield. That cold, strategic silence of someone trying to wait for the dust to settle. But with me, the dust would never settle again, because it wasn't just a betrayal of money. It was a betrayal of blood. On the second day, Bethany took me to her lawyer's house, a firm, competent woman named Fiona. She treated me with an education that gave me back some of my dignity. I showed all the papers, the audios that Dylan had sent, the dossier that Bethany had put together. Fiona listened to everything calmly, asked direct questions, wrote in a little notebook, and then looked me in the eyes and said, "Mr. Arthur, what your son did is serious. This is fraud, attempted undue interdiction, embezzlement, and elder abuse. He will not only be investigated, but may face criminal charges." I swallowed hard. I never thought I'd see a son of mine involved with a criminal lawyer. Never. But I also never thought I'd find myself running from a car, so I wouldn't be locked up in a clinic like an old dog. So everything was possible. We signed the documents. I filed a formal complaint. Fiona prepared an extrajudicial notification, preventing any movement by Alex in my name, and notified the clinic, informing them that any attempt at commitment would be considered kidnapping and would be prosecuted. When I left her office, I felt a little more whole, not because justice was going to erase what he tried to do, but because I felt I was finally standing up, that I wouldn't be that quiet father who suffers in hiding, who dies little by little, waiting for an apology that never comes. I would be the father who resisted, who didn't let silence win. That night, I sat on the porch with Bethany. She brought me coffee and stayed there beside me, quiet. The silence now was different. It was the good silence of someone who doesn't need to explain anything. I kept looking at the stars and thought of Anne. If she were alive, she would have discovered this before me. I said. Bethany smiled sideways and replied. She would have slapped him before any lawyer. We laughed. We laughed sadly, but we laughed. And it was there that I knew that even in the midst of so much pain, there was still something to be grateful for, because Bethany was the only anchor in that sea of lies. She could have stayed quiet, could have pretended she didn't see, but she didn't. She screamed at me on the phone. She saved me. The next morning, I received a visit from Dylan. He arrived with a bag in his hand, his eyes lowered, and said, "Mr. Arthur, I needed to see you. I'm sorry for not speaking up before. I thought he would change. I thought it was just angry talk. But when I saw the papers, I froze. I was scared. And it was only when he traveled with you that I understood that he was really determined to disappear with you. I held his hand and said, 'You saved me, boy. And now go on with your life. You don't deserve to carry this guilt. He's the one who will have to answer for this.' He cried, hugged me, and left. I don't know if he'll see him again, but inside me, it doesn't matter anymore. That same afternoon, an email arrived on my phone. It was from Alex. Cold, short. It just said, "Dad, I just wanted what was best for you. You're old, fragile, and you don't see things clearly anymore. If it were for my harm, I would never have done this. But it's for your own good." That disgusted me. The kind of phrase that disguises cowardice as care, that calls betrayal protection, that hides greed behind concern. I didn't respond. I deleted it. Because there are things you don't respond to. There are things you keep quiet and act on. The days went on. I went back to walking. I went to the supermarket with Bethany, sat on a park bench, and watched children running. Little by little, life came back. But a part of me remained silent. The part that still loved Alex with innocence. That died, it died the day he planned to bury me alive in a clinic in exchange for a bank account. But if he thought I was going to disappear, he was wrong, because no father is perfect. But no father deserves to be betrayed like that. And now he's going to have to face not just the law. He's going to have to live with the shame. The shame of having tried to destroy the one who believed in him the most. And that hurts more than any punishment. Going back to my house was like entering a battlefield after the war was over. The curtain still had Anne's scent. The armchair, where I read in the late afternoon, still had the deep mark of my body and the calendar on the wall. It still marked the month when everything had gone wrong. The key turned with difficulty. The iron gate groaned, as if complaining about my absence. But I entered with my chest held high, because that floor was mine. That roof I had paid for, with every callus on my hand. And now, after everything, it was time to recover what remained of my dignity. It was time to return, but with different eyes. Before opening the door, I looked around. The street was silent. Alex's car wasn't there. No strange movement. I entered slowly. I turned on the lights, took a deep breath. Nothing appeared out of place. But everything was different, because I was now another man. A man who knew evil from within his own family. A man who had to flee from his own son so as not to be buried alive. And a man who returned not to forget, but to enforce. On the third day after the complaint, lawyer Fiona called me. She said that the judge had granted as a matter of urgency the suspension of any attempt at interdiction. More than that, the process filed by Alex was annulled, and now the criminal investigation was running in parallel. The clinic had confirmed that he had already paid for 8 months in advance and signed the terms as if he were my legal guardian. This alone constituted documentary fraud. The responsible detective asked me to remain alert, but calm. And for the first time, I slept. I really slept with the certainty that justice might be slow. But it didn't fail when we don't bow our heads. The next day, I sat in the backyard. I looked at the cherry tree I planted the day Alex was born. It still bore fruit, even old, kind of crooked. It still resisted like me. I kept looking at it and thinking if that little boy I rocked in my lap would have the courage to look at me now. I doubt it because cowardice likes to do things behind your back. Who plots secret commitment? Who forges papers? Who records false authorization and disappears? Doesn't have the guts to face their own father head on. And he didn't. It was also on that day that I decided to go through old papers. I took the blue folder where I keep the bills, tax receipts, certificates. I reviewed everything, organized the inheritance statements, transactions, deposit receipts. I made sure to leave everything in order. And among these papers, I found an old handwritten letter from my Uncle Elias shortly before he died. He said, "Use this money to maintain your freedom. Never depend on anyone. Freedom is something of value. Whoever has a little is already rich." That phrase tore me apart inside because that's what it was. I almost lost my freedom. It wasn't from illness, nor from old age. It was from greed. and the one who almost took that from me was my own blood. I called Bethany that night. I asked her to come have dinner with me on Saturday. I said I wanted to start a new custom dinner at home every weekend. No rush, no cell phone, no excuse. Just the two of us. She agreed right away and said she would bring the grandchildren too, that I needed the sound of children running through the rooms. And she was right, because after so much silence, it was time to hear life again. But before that, I needed to resolve a detail called deed. I took my documents, contacted Fiona, and asked for a complete update of my property registration. I also asked her to include specific clauses that would prevent any future transfer without my physical presence and facial recognition. I don't want anyone else to play with my identity, not bank, not son. I also left instructions that in case of death, the property would be bequeathed directly to the grandchildren with a life usufruct clause for Bethany. Alex's name was removed from everything. He wouldn't inherit even the door handle. Fiona looked at me firmly and said, "Mr. Arthur, I've never seen anyone with so much lucidity and courage." I thanked her. But it's not courage. It's survival. Because when life pushes you into a corner, either you learn to scream or you learn to write. And I decided to write my destiny with my own hands. In the late afternoon, someone rang the doorbell. I went to the gate. It was Dylan again, alone. He brought an envelope. He's trying to convince me to come back. Mr. Arthur. But I can't. I feel like an accomplice. Here are the screenshots, the audios, the records of what I witnessed. I want you to have all this in your hands. I don't want to carry this with me. I took the envelope, thanked him, and just said, "You saved an old man's life. Never forget that." He left with tears in his eyes. I went in, closed the door, sat in the rocking chair, and stayed there for a long time, holding that envelope as if it were a mirror that showed who was who loved me, and who just wanted what I had. That night, I wrote everything in a notebook, not to prosecute anyone, but to record, so that one day when my grandchildren are adults, they'll know that their grandfather was betrayed, but didn't fall, that he was deceived, but reacted, that they tried to lock him up in a place far away, but he came back home, and especially that the house where he grew up is now out of reach of those who tried to destroy what mattered most, his freedom. And this house will continue to stand because it was built with truth, and those who live on lies don't live here. That Saturday, my kitchen table looked like an old movie that I thought I'd never see again. Bethany arrived with her 2 children, running, jumping, bringing laughter in their shoes. Hannah, 7 years old, ran straight to my lap with a drawing in her hand. "It's you, Grandpa," with the sun behind. I took that paper carefully and hung it on the refrigerator. The house that had been mute breathed again. I put the flowered tablecloth on the table, the same one Anne liked, and served roast chicken, stuffing, and rice with turmeric that I learned from her. Family food, home food, food for those who stay, because those who love stay, those who lie disappear. While the kids ate and Bethany helped me open the wine bottle, I looked around and felt that this moment was mine. A small moment of peace after a storm that almost took everything from me. That silence from Alex that initially gnawed at me now began to have another taste. A taste of deserved absence. Because his absence was no longer a void. It was relief. He who once called me a hero father, who said he wanted to be like me, today was just a name stuck in my throat. And if he ever came back to ring this doorbell, I don't know if I'd have words. Maybe just a look from someone who saw too much, felt too much, and survived. After lunch, Bethany called me aside. She said that Alex had gone back to work normally at the office as if nothing had happened, that he was going around saying that his father had a breakdown and that everything was an exaggeration. But no one was believing it much. More than that, some clients were suspicious of his transactions, including a gentleman who had been my client in the days as an agricultural technician, and who recognized me in a photo. That's Alex's father. Very good people helped my father with a land problem about 25 years ago. Life has these ironies. The mask falls even when we think it's stuck. I decided it was time to go out, walk around the city, show that I was standing. I put on my old hat, the vest with pockets, and went to the downtown market. I met acquaintances, stood in line at the checkout, bought plantains, and came back with a bag in each hand. Some asked me where I had been, others just smiled. But in all the looks, there was respect. The kind of respect you can't buy with a diploma or impose with a shout. The respect that comes from someone who never turned their back, who faced their own blood and still didn't lose composure. On Monday, I went to visit Dr. Richard, my bank manager. He received me with coffee and a sincere handshake. Mr. Arthur, everything is secure. The accesses have been redefined, and only you, with biometrics and password, can move things here. I thanked him. I asked him to note that if something happened to me, only Bethany would have access to the instructions left in a sealed letter. And I warned, if Alex shows up here, pretend you don't know me, because the man he tried to disappear died on that highway. Who's here now is someone else. I returned home with the documents in my pocket and a heavy but firm heart. I went in, took off my shoes, turned on the radio, and went to water the plants. The white rose that Anne planted was blooming again. I stood there, looking at that flower, and thinking about how there are people who grow in silence, in the middle of cement, dust, disappointment. It was there, alive, beautiful, strong, just like me. In the late afternoon, I sat down to write again in my notebook. This time, I wrote a letter, not to Alex, but to myself. A farewell letter to that hopeful father, to that man who believed that a son's love was guaranteed. It's not. It's not. A son's love is not an obligation. It's not payment. It's not a contract. It's choice. And he chose the wrong path. But now, the one who chooses is me. I closed the letter, put it in the envelope, and placed it in the same drawer where I keep my ID, voter registration, and the last photo of Anne smiling, because that's also part of my story. And denying pain doesn't heal, but writing about it teaches. The night fell slowly. I made tea, opened the window, looked at the street, and I was certain that whoever plants neglect harvest distance, and that this distance is now all he'll have from me. The news began to circulate slowly, as everything does in a small town. First, it was Mrs. Rita from the pharmacy, who commented to the neighbor that Arthur was back. Then, it was the baker who said he saw me at the farmer's market. And then the comment reached the ears of more distant family, those who only appear at funerals and baptisms. In 3 days, my inbox already had messages from cousins, from nephews, from people who never came to have coffee with me, but who now wanted to know how I was after that confusion. Confusion for them was the name they gave to the attempted disappearance, theft, betrayal, that almost put me behind a gate with a caregiver and tea at 5. But what surprised me most wasn't the curiosity of distant relatives. It was the call from my sister-in-law, Anne's sister, a firm woman, one of those who says what she thinks. She didn't know anything until she saw Dylan, Alex's ex, crying on a church bench. He was in pieces. Arthur, he told me he saved you from something horrible. I went after it. Talked to Bethany, and now I'm calling you. Not to ask for an explanation, but to say I'm with you. And that shame is not enough for what he did. That touched me, because I knew her word carried weight and that many people were going to start looking at Alex differently, and looking hurts, because lies get sick when exposed. That same week, there was a birthday dinner for Alex's niece. I, of course, didn't go. Wasn't even invited. But Dylan went, and in the middle of the party, they said he stood up and spoke loud and clear. What Alex tried to do to his father was inhuman. Anyone here who thinks it's an exaggeration can take the highway with him. The hall fell silent. The birthday girl's mother, visibly embarrassed, tried to change the subject. But the damage was already done. The whole family now knew. Not because it told them, but because truth has this power to be born, even when buried deep. The next day, Bethany showed me a screenshot. It was a family group on the app, and someone asked, "Is it really true?" And another replied, "If Arthur disappeared and came back like this, it's because there's something." And I don't doubt anything coming from Alex. I kept reading that with a tight chest, because deep down, part of me wanted someone to defend him, to say, no, he wouldn't be capable. But no one said it. No one, not a single one, that night while the fans spun in the room. I kept looking at the ceiling and understood that the biggest punishment for Alex wouldn't come from me. It would come from the reflection, from the look of others, from the memory that people will have when they hear his name. Because justice isn't just stamped paper, seal, and sentence. Justice is when you lose what can't be bought. Respect. And he lost it. On Friday, the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Dylan's mother, an educated lady with a tired voice. "Mr. Arthur, I just wanted to thank you for welcoming my son when he was without ground. He's ashamed of what he lived, what he saw, but feels peace for having done the right thing." I took a deep breath and said, "He saved me, and now he needs to save himself, too." I hung up and kept thinking how many people were dragged by all that mess that Alex set up. He dug alone, but dragged many people with him. Later, I went to Bethany's house to take some vegetables from the garden. When I arrived, the boys were playing in the garage. They saw me and ran. They hugged me tight. Hannah said, "Grandpa, at school, the teacher asked us to write about the hero of our life. I wrote about you." That broke me down, because in the middle of so much pain, there was a spark of light, a girl who looked at me and saw strength and not weakness, respect and not pity, love and not interest. I returned home with empty bags, but a full heart. I went in, closed the door, turned on the radio at low volume, and sat in the rocking chair. I opened the notebook where I'd been writing everything since I came back, and on that page, I wrote just one sentence. When family becomes witness to your contempt, even silence becomes a sentence. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and slept like someone who knows they don't need to explain themselves anymore. The visit came without warning in the middle of a cloudy afternoon. The gate knocked twice. I thought it was the mailman, or Mrs. Teresa from next door, who always came to ask for lemons. But when I opened the door, I came face to face with him. Alex, head down, hair tied back, and that same wrinkled blazer he wore when he didn't know where to hide his tiredness anymore. He slowly raised his eyes and said, "Dad, can I come in?" I stood still. For a moment, I saw myself in a distorted mirror, a son looking at his father as if looking for shelter. But there was no more shelter there. No open door. No ready excuse. There was only the truth standing between the two of us. And that doesn't move. "This is no longer a place for those who lie," I replied with a dry voice. He tried to say something, but I cut him off. "Everything you needed to tell me, you already said when you put me in that car, thinking you were making a fool of me. When you signed papers behind my back, when you erased me from your story to keep what was mine." He stood there, silent, like someone receiving a sentence, without a lawyer. Then he lowered his head, turned his back and left without a fight, without explanation, without even asking how I was. And maybe that hurt more than any scream. I closed the gate slowly, went to the living room, sat in the armchair, and took a deep breath. His visit didn't bring relief, didn't bring repentance. It only brought confirmation that that little boy wasn't coming back. The man who now inhabited my son's body was another, a stranger, a man who chose the shortcut, who preferred money to his father's look, who traded care for control. And I had nothing more to offer someone like that because even love has limits. And he passed mine a long time ago. The next day, I told Bethany. She was silent, then said, "Dad, if he comes back, call the police. This is no longer about conversation. It's about respect." I agreed. Because when someone tries to disappear with you, what comes after isn't reconciliation. It's survival. And I was surviving day after day with brewed coffee and a straight spine, with documents in order and eyes wide open, because whoever goes through what I went through doesn't sleep the same way anymore. Sleeps with one eye on the pillow and the other on memory. Later, I went to the notary. I signed an addendum to the will. I added a request that in my honor a small park bench be made with Anne's name engraved so she continues receiving sun even after she's gone. The attendant smiled emotionally. "That's beautiful, Mr. Arthur." And I replied, "It's poetic justice. She deserved a place of peace. And so do I." On the way home, I met Mr. Gerald, an old neighbor who stopped me at the gate. I heard what happened. I just wanted to say, I admire your firmness. Many people would have stayed quiet. I looked at him and replied, "Those who stay too quiet rot from within." And he nodded with lowered eyes, because there's pain that's mute, and there's pain that screams with a look. That night was cold, but inside me there was fire, a calm, firm fire that doesn't burn, illuminates, a fire that came from knowing I was alive, that I had won, not because I destroyed my son, but because he couldn't destroy me. And that's what no one takes away. The next Sunday, Bethany and the grandchildren came again. This time they brought cake, soda, even a board game. We laughed, played, talked nonsense. Hannah said, "Grandpa, we're going to come every Sunday." "Okay." And I replied, "If you come with that smile, you have a permanent seat. Because there in that house lives those who love me, and the rest turn to dust on the road. And if someone ever asks why my eldest son never appeared again, I'll just say, whoever tries to disappear with their father disappears from their own story." The following week, I received a summons, a stamped envelope delivered by a court officer with the coldness that the law sometimes has. It was a contestation notification. He wanted to prove that everything I had done, the revocation of power of attorney, blocking accounts, changing the will, had been in a moment of mental confusion and under the influence of third parties. More precisely, Bethany. I laughed inside. Then I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. That wasn't a surprise. It was just another attempt to erase the consequences of what he himself had planted. But what he didn't know is that even before he filed this request, I had already foreseen everything. And with each line of that summons, he dug deeper the moral grave he built for himself. I picked up the phone, called Fiona, and went straight to the point. "The attack has begun." She asked me to stay calm, said she already expected this type of maneuver, and that she had already prepared a response petition. But more than that, she said, "Mr. Arthur, now it's time to use what you have saved. The evidence, the audios, the documents. Do you still want to proceed with everything?" I replied firmly, "I do, because whoever tries to erase a father with a pen needs to see their own name torn apart." Actually, in the following days, I received a visit from a social worker, was heard by a judicial psychologist, filled out reports, took exams. I was treated like never before. Each one of them left my house with the same comment: "You are more lucid than many young people out there." I laughed because I always had my head in the right place. What I lacked was just the care to know who to share trust with. And now I was learning. Trust is like glass. After it cracks, even gluing it is never the same again. In the middle of all this, a handwritten letter appeared, sent without a name on the return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was from Dylan. He said he was in another city, starting over, away from Alex's shadow. He told me that after everything, he tried to win him back with sweet words and promises of change, but that deep down, he was the same man. He said he only regretted not telling me before, but that the weight he carried was now lighter since he saved me. You're not just a father who resisted. You're a wall that didn't fall. I kept the letter folded in the notebook where I write my story, because some words we don't forget. They stick to the soul like a tattoo. At the preliminary hearing, I was accompanied by Bethany. We entered together, heads held high, while Alex arrived in a suit with a lawyer and an arrogant look. He avoided looking at me. He pretended attention to the papers. But with each phrase said by the judge, his air seemed to deflate. Fiona spoke with precision, showed the documents, the screenshots, the audios, delivered the reports. When she finished, she just said, "My client is not fighting for revenge. He's fighting for respect, something that was denied to him by the one who should protect him." The judge just nodded. Silence in the room, silence that weighs, silence that points to the guilty without having to say the name. We returned home that day without saying much. Bethany drove, and I looked out the window. It was as if everything was in slow motion. The houses, the trees, the posts, everything passed, and I felt I was reaching a point in life where time doesn't forgive, but also teaches. I couldn't change what my son did, but I could decide what kind of man I wanted to be in the face of it. And I chose to be firm without hatred, but without forgetting, without revenge, but with justice. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Whoever tears the past to gain the present ends up losing the future." And that's what he did. He tore everything we lived just to try to silence me. But he couldn't. I was still there with my memories, my lucidity, and my dignity intact. The following week, I received a call from the public prosecutor's office. The investigation for attempted fraud against the elderly was officially open, and now it was no longer between father and son. It was between citizen and criminal, and not even the surname he carries will erase that. I sat on my porch, hot tea in hand, and thought of Anne. If she were here, she might say, "He was no longer your son, Arthur. He was just a name on the certificate." And that's right. Because a son who tries to erase his father erases himself from his own story. And now I'm the one writing this story, word by word, sentence by sentence, until the end. The process was moving fast. Fiona called me almost every day, warning of new dispatches, public prosecutors' manifestations, collected testimonies, and even a search warrant for Alex's accounts. The circle was closing, and I didn't feel revenge. I felt justice. It was as if, after so long carrying the pain alone, someone had finally looked at me and said, "You're not crazy. You're right." And for a father who was treated like a burden, that's worth more than money. Because dignity, when lost, is hard to sew. But when recovered, we breathe different air. The following week, I was called to testify orally. I arrived at the courthouse in simple clothes, blue shirt, clean shoes, and slow pace, but each step was firm. I was led to a room, sat in a cushioned chair, and told everything without embellishing, without anger, just the raw truth. The invitation for the trip, the fake smile, the endless road, Bethany's scream on the phone, the escape, the papers, the audios, the attempt to erase my will as a man and citizen. The clerk noted everything. The prosecutor listened to me attentively. When I finished, she took off her glasses, took a deep breath, and said, "Mr. Arthur, you are much stronger than he ever imagined." I left there with a light chest. Not because justice had been done yet. No, that would take time. But because I had spoken. And speaking is an act of freedom. I returned home with a whole soul. And when I passed through the gate, I saw Hannah, my granddaughter, painting in the backyard. She raised her brush and shouted, "Grandpa, I'm drawing a castle for you to live in." I smiled. I thought about saying I already lived in a castle because that backyard with her innocence running around was worth more than any palace. But I stayed quiet because certain truths don't need to be said. They're felt. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote about small forgettings, about how over time we erase the names of those who hurt us, not with anger, but for protection, because remembering hurts and forgetting is an act of survival. I wrote, "A name can be on the certificate, but not in memory." And that was it. Alex had lost his place as a son. He continued to be what the law said, but in the heart, he no longer lived. The following week, a local newspaper published a discreet note. City lawyer investigated for fraud and attempted undue interdiction against own father. It didn't mention names, but those who knew the story understood. I received calls from old colleagues, former clients of his, people who said, "I never imagined this coming from him." I just replied, "We never imagine, but sometimes blood doesn't guarantee character." Bethany called me on Saturday. She said Alex had tried to empty an account with the shared name of the firm they had together years ago, and that the bank had already blocked it. She said that now his defense was to accuse everyone of conspiracy, and laughed. "Dad, he's drowning in his own inventions." I didn't respond with laughter, just with silence, because there are people who don't need an enemy. They destroy themselves, and he was erasing himself with his own ink. On Sunday, Bethany and the grandchildren came with a simple cake and a candle without a number. "Today is the day you came back home. We're going to celebrate every year." I got emotional, felt my eyes wet, and realized that in the end, I didn't lose everything. I lost a son, yes, but I gained the chance to write a new chapter of my life with those who stayed, and that no paper signed by force steals. On the last line of my notebook that night, I wrote, "A son is one who cares, not one who pretends. Inheritance is what we leave in hearts, not in the will, and memory only shelters those who deserve to stay." Then I closed the notebook, put it in the nightstand, turned off the light, and slept. I slept like I hadn't slept in a long time, without fear of waking up anywhere, because now I'm the one who decides where I stay. The morning when the final decision came out was of shy sun and calm wind. The court officer arrived at my door with a brown sealed envelope and called me by my full name. I opened the gate with the tranquility of someone who already knew what was coming. I received the paper in my hands and read slowly, line by line. The judge had closed the case. All of Alex's attempts were denied. His accusations against me and against Bethany were filed as unfounded and malicious. The fraud investigation was accepted. The judge wrote in firm letters, the defendant demonstrated full lucidity, coherence, and independence, and at the end, his name stamped as defendant. I took a deep breath and smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of justice. I sat on the porch with the letter in my hands and called Bethany. She arrived quickly with the boys in the back seat, read the paper in silence, and gave me a firm hug. Truth won. Dad. I shook my head and said, it wasn't truth that won. It was resistance, because truth alone sometimes stays quiet. But resistance screams, even when no one wants to hear. The following days were silent. Alex disappeared. I heard he took leave from the office, that some old clients decided not to renew contracts with him. No one confirmed anything to me, and I didn't even try to find out, because now he was just that, a distant echo, a poorly told story that was left behind, someone who tried to take everything from me and ended up losing his own name among the living of memory. Because I didn't die, I came back stronger. I decided to do something symbolic. I took Anne's old wooden bench, the one she used to remove dry leaves from the garden, and took it to the square. I donated it to the city hall with the condition of putting a small plaque in memory of those who remain. They accepted. And every time I pass by there, I see people sitting on it, people who don't know the story, but rest on a piece of my life. And that's enough for me. The house continues full on Sundays. Hannah now makes brigadeiros and calls me my best friend. Little Liam asking when I'm going to tell more stories from the farm. Bethany brought a hammock and tied it between the backyard trees. And I keep writing in the same notebook, page by page, because now I'm the one who decides what will remain of my story. At the end of this journey, there's no revenge left. There's firmness, no anger left. There's memory. And more than anything, there's the certainty that being a father isn't staying quiet to keep the peace. It's protecting your own soul so they don't bury you alive. And that's what I did. When they asked me to get in that car, I went thinking it was love. But I got out understanding it was an ambush, and I survived. Today, if someone asks what happened to my eldest son, I don't answer with resentment. I just say he left and took with him everything that no longer fit here. Lies, contempt, greed. Because this house now only shelters what is true. And inside here, there's no more space for those who fake love to steal peace. And if you made it this far, I thank you for listening to me. And I would also like to thank The Revenge with Thomas Channel for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. And to help this channel, subscribe here and share this video, because every day there's a new story. And who knows, one of them might not be similar to yours.